right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Vill Chillin' Podcast, part of the Villainy and Tea Network. My name is Aaron.
My name's Jack.
And as always, just make sure to check us out on your favorite podcast service. Give us a follow or a rating there. And leave a comment on our videos if you like anything we're talking about or find it interesting or just have anything to say in general. You know, how awesome we're doing, how bad we're doing. It all helps us as we move forward. So, With that said, today, which I think I'm going to have to lead this one with another quick disclaimer, and that'll become self-apparent once we get into the actual topic, but we usually keep it fairly G-rated, but based on who we're talking about, there's going to be words used that aren't always child appropriate, I guess. And so for that to make sense, this is the start of our People of Kentucky series, mini-series, whatever you want to call it. And we're speaking on Hunter S Thompson.
Hunter S Thompson.
Yes. So, as I said just a second ago, the reason for the disclaimer is probably a little apparent now. So, when you first think of or hear somebody talk about Hunter S. Thompson, what do you think?
The American dream on drugs, I guess. I mean, that's really what comes to mind.
And I mean, that's funny because that's basically the whole point of the book. But, see, anytime I hear Hunter S. Thompson, I get that image of Fear and Loathing. You know, the beginning image where, you know, long cigarette hanging out his mouth, the red convertible, the hat, the sunglasses, like that is always the very first image that pops into my head. And then, of course, Gonzo. I mean,
in that monologue at the beginning, man.
Yeah.
Like that sets the tone.
Exactly. So I guess we will dive into the life of Hunter S. Thompson. So he was born in Louisville, Kentucky, of course, and he is the oldest of three boys. His mother worked as a head librarian for Louisville Free Public Library. Interestingly enough, we were talking before the show, and you kind of commented that that's probably led to part of his love for books and journalism and things like that. I mean,
right, I would think that had to influence his writing.
Well,
definitely being around that, exposed to all that.
And especially during the time. I mean, now you're talking 30s and 40s, so I mean, books were definitely a much bigger thing then than they are now, unfortunately. But his father was an insurance adjuster and World War I vet. When Thompson was 6, his family settled in the Highlands area. Unfortunately, his father died when he was 14 from a long-term neuromuscular disease. I'm not going to pronounce this right. Myasthenia gravis.
We'll just say MG.
Yes. And of course, that left his mother to raise him and his two brothers on her own, continuing her work as a librarian, and also led to a drinking issue apparently following the death of Thompson's father. So
that's rough.
Well, and between the librarian and then the drinking, I feel like it's foreshadowing a lot of Hunter S. Thompson. But from an early age, he was actually really interested in sports and helped co-found the Hawks Athletic Club while he was attending Bloom Elementary School. And this led to an invitation to join Louisville's Castlewood Athletic Club, which at the time helped prepare kids for high school sports, which is pretty cool. Even though that's not something he's known for, he did do a lot of sports reporting and things, at least in his later years. But interestingly enough, he kind of stopped playing sports after like elementary school. He would attend Atherton High School before transferring to Male High School in 1952, and was actually a member of the Athenaeum Literary Association, which was a school-sponsored literary and social club founded back in 1862. Most members at the time were part of Louisville's upper-class families, so he was doing a lot of associating, I guess, with the upper echelon of Louisville's high schoolers at the time. And as a member, Thompson contributed to articles and helped produce the yearbook. He was eventually ejected from the club in 1955 for criminal activity. Of course, the story there is he just happened to be in a car when the robbery suspect was, I guess, apprehended and ultimately was charged as an accessory. And he spent 31 days in jail.
He was probably just trying to write a story. Like, that's Gonzo
That's
journalism at its finest.
See, a lot of people attribute, like, some of his later work to Gonzo. No, that he started much sooner. Unfortunately, that 31-day stint in jail, though, affected his ability to graduate. The school superintendent would not allow him to take the finals and would not allow him to graduate. So a week after he got out of jail, he joined the Air Force, which I guess was kind of a common thing back then anyways. If you got nothing else to do, you join the military.
Try to find some kind of like structure out of that or something.
So he was a member of the Air Force from 1955 to 1958 and completed basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas and then transferred to Scott Air Force Base in Illinois to study electronics. He applied to become an aviator but was rejected. And in 1956, he transferred to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. So that is one thing. He was, even before all of his journalism stuff, he was all over the place with the military. So while he was at Eglin, he enrolled in Florida State University and landed his first professional writing job as a sports editor, naturally by falsifying his job experience. Once again, as Gonzo as it gets.
Creative rights, you
know. The job allowed him to actually travel even more around the U.S. with the Eglin Eagles football team covering the games. In 1958, his commanding officer recommended him for early honorable discharge, stating that Thompson, although talented, will not be guided by policy. And, I mean, once you know his life, it's not exactly surprising, but I find it interesting the way he worded that. It's like he's a talented guy, but he just does not listen. So, after the stint in the military, Thompson worked as a sports editor for a newspaper in Jersey Shore, and eventually relocated to New York City. While there, he briefly worked for Time magazine as a copy boy, but was fired in 1959 for insubordination.
You see a common theme, like he loves authority, like that's his favorite, you know.
Yeah, structure and authority
that's
are
his jam, dude. Put it on repeat.
No. And then he briefly worked as a reporter for the Middletown Daily Record, where he was eventually fired after damaging an office canning machine and arguing with the local restaurant owner, who happened to also be a big advertiser for the paper. So.
Wow. I want to know what the argument was about.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be a fly on the wall through half of the stuff this guy did.
That's awesome.
So after all that, he moved to Puerto Rico to take a job with El Sportivo, which was a sports magazine there at the time. But shortly after he got there, the magazine closed down. So he applied for a job with the San Juan Star, but was turned down. Eventually, he returned to the mainland and went to San Francisco, where he worked as a security guard and a caretaker. During that time, he also published...
Wait. A caretaker?
Like a caretaker of property.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, property, not people.
Yeah, I was going to... Go on. Misunderstood.
We're not at the fear and loathing part yet, Jack. He He also published a feature in Rogue about the artisan and bohemian culture of Big Sur, which is like the neighborhood where he lived. And wrote 2 novels and many short stories, but had very little success with publication. In 1962, he went to South America as a correspondent for the National Observer. And while in Brazil, he spent times reporting for the Brazil Herald and continued to write for the National Observer after returning to the U.S. And in 1965, became immersed in the drug and hippie culture rooting itself in California. So,
and that's what I think of when I think of Hunter S Thompson. Is
of course
that sub 1960s subculture. That's awesome.
Exactly. And so around this time is when the editor of The Nation hired Thompson to write a story about the Hells Angels in California. So obviously everyone knows about Fear and Loathing based on its many movie adaptations, but Hells Angels is what really got his name out there and how he really started to develop the Gonzo style, if you will. The article appeared in on May 17th, 1965, and after he published the article, he received numerous book offers, and so that's when he spent months and up to a year writing with the Hells Angels. Of course, eventually they felt kind of slighted that he was only there for personal gain, not actually part of the culture, I guess. And of course, he ended up getting into an argument at a party, I guess, and he was pretty badly beaten. And the book still got published, though. and
Still got a good story out of it.
In 1966, the hardcover book was published. It received immediate praise, and the fight was part of pretty much the marketing ploy behind it. Like, oh, you got beat up by the Hells Angels. Find out why, I guess. I haven't read that one. But that's definitely what kind of started his whole style of gonzo journalism. It hadn't quite fully cemented, I guess, but it definitely got him going. Funny though, after he sold after the successful publication of the book, he ended up running for sheriff in Aspen, Colorado, as part of the Freak Power movement, which was apparently a bunch of citizens running for government offices at the same time to try to, like, I guess,
like a third party or something.
Change. Yeah, kind of that type thing. In 1970, he wrote an article called "The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved," in which the editor paired Thompson with Ralph Steadman, who he did a lot of work with.
Mm-hmm.
Ralph Steadman's illustrations are all through Thompson's work. And the article ultimately had nothing to do with the race, but instead centered around the drunk revelry surrounding the event in his hometown, our hometown, of course, Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm sure we've all witnessed a little drunken revelry around Derby time. So that was his first real use, or I guess what is now known as gonzo journalism, which is described as an energetic first-person participatory writing style in which the author is the protagonist. It draws its power from a combination of social critique and self-satire.
It's really interesting, too, because the Derby, I think, is a great example of, like, where gonzo journalism, like, flourishes, right? Like, you can really only know about the Derby by being there, as far as, like, that experience. And that's I think that's a great way to see how it was born, like, right there, like, as far as
between that and the Hells Angels, like, that really kind of cemented his idea of journalism, where he put yourself right in the middle as the main character, and instead of an outside view looking in, right? Which makes sense, and it's definitely a very different perspective than what anyone was seeing in the 70s to that point. Now, after that, he continued to use the style of writing for pretty much the rest of his career. Continued reporting for different, magazines and newspaper outlets and everything. And then, of course, we come to Fear and Loathing. So, Fear and Loathing, it's one of those movies, like, you almost have a new experience every time you watch it, because it's just so out there.
It's easy to miss it, certain parts the first time. You have to like you said, every time you watch it, it's like watching a new movie sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, just the whole depiction of everything, and it can be hard to follow. So it's a pretty wild experience every time, and of course, if you've seen the movie, you know why. So with the birth and adaptation of the Gonzo journalism style, it definitely played a huge role in the Fear and Loathing book, and it's definitely his most known work based on the movies alone, probably.
That quote that he took, "He who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the burden of being a man," or something like that. That was, I remember that really stuck with me when I first started, reading the book. It was,
yeah,
that kind of sets the tone for the
whole thing. Yeah. So the work started out during his research, or I guess the whole, I should say, everything that he decided to write about was starting to be, I guess, born or come to fruition while he was working on research on an expose for Rolling Stone on the 1970 killing of journalist Ruben Salazar, who was killed during a march against the Vietnam War in Los Angeles, I think by the LAPD. So that's where Thompson was supposed to be reporting on. However, one of his sources was Oscar Zeta Acosta, who was a prominent activist and attorney. They decided to take a trip to Las Vegas after finding it difficult to have any real fruitful conversation due to the racial tensions and everything going on in LA at the time. And so, while in Vegas, Thompson was technically supposed to be working on one assignment for Sports Illustrated to write a story on the Mint 400 motorcycle race, which of course is pretty prominent part of the movie as well. And I'm sure the book, it's been a long time since I read the book. I've seen the movie more recently. But the article was ultimately rejected by Sports Illustrated and picked up by Rolling Stone, which gave Thompson the push to finish his work. And Thompson and Acosta decided to return to Las Vegas and attend a drug enforcement conference. And these two experiences became what we now know as Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Originally, two-part story in Rolling Stone in 1971, and then published by Random House as a book a year later. The major theme of the novel is the failure of 1960s counterculture and has been critically acclaimed as the best book written on the decade of dope. And it began the real success of Gonzo journalism. So while he had used it at the time, it wasn't as well known and definitely wasn't a popular thing of the time. But once this came out, it was a little different. And if you haven't seen the book or read the book or seen the movie, the book is written as a first-person account of a journalist named Raoul Duke and his 300-pound Samoan attorney, Dr. Gonzo. And they end up sidetracked on a search for the American dream with 2 bags of grass, 75 pellets of mescaline, 5 sheets of high-powered blotter acid, a salt shaker half full of cocaine, and a whole galaxy of multicolored uppers, downers, screamers, laughers, and also a quart of tequila, a quart of rum, a case of Budweiser, a pint of raw ether, and 2 dozen ammos. So,
just sounds like a Wednesday, right?
Right. Quite the experience for 2 guys. I mean, granted, one is apparently a 300-pound Samoan attorney, but and I think it's funny. how he pretty much just refers to him as my attorney throughout the whole movie. Like, he doesn't actually give him a name or anything, really. He's just my attorney. So after Fear and Loathing, it was kind of, I mean, he continued to write for Rolling Stone, focusing on election campaign of Richard Nixon and George McGovern. But he was a very open critic of Nixon after his presidency, and even after Nixon died. Like, I wanted to put quotes in here, but I didn't even feel comfortable. He did not like Nixon. Thompson's journalism works began to decline after his job to cover the Rumble in the Jungle, the world famous heavyweight boxing match between George Foreman and fellow Louisville, Kentucky native Muhammad Ali. Thompson completely missed the match, spending the time intoxicated in his hotel without a story to even submit.
And that's so out of character, like.
Right. Sometimes people can't deal with fame, and I think his later life really kind of explains that. Like, especially some of the experiences he did or went through, or maybe the drugs, I don't know. I mean, he became kind of a recluse later in life, you know. He could never really move forward. Time kind of left him behind. Just sad.
Well, like you said, the fame. I wonder if after, the success of Fear and Loathing, if he, like you said, just kind of wanted to keep to himself and be recluse, during that time, because see him do a story on the Rumble in the Jungle seems like that would have been awesome. Like, that's something that's disappointing that we didn't get to see. Like, to see his perspective on it inside it at the show would have been awesome.
Exactly, especially reporting on a fellow Louisville native, like hearing his perspective on that, on Muhammad Ali, and then knowing that he was a sports writer. He was a talented sports editor. It is a shame that probably would have been, like, I mean, dare I say, like, his third great work. It would have had the potential at the very least, because that was a crazy atmosphere.
He would have been writing about the fights outside the fight, because I'm sure, hearing
he's like, enough people reported on the actual fight. Yeah,
it would have been an interesting story.
Absolutely. In 1976, he was originally planned to cover more presidential campaign footage for Rolling Stone. However, they ended up canceling the project, and they sent him to Vietnam to cover the aftermath of the Vietnam War, kind of like, I guess, the recovery and things going on. But for whatever reason, Rolling Stone canceled his life insurance, and he said, nope, see you later. He left Vietnam and took the story with him, refusing to publish it. I think eventually it got published, but it was much, much later.
So I'm guessing that kind of caused a little rift between them and the Rolling Stone at that point.
Yeah, he still had Rolling Stone's articles throughout his life, but it probably wasn't major ones or anything. Okay, gotcha. You know what I mean? During the 80s, his activity began to really slow down, at least for what people had become to expect of him. And it's also when Where the Buffalo Roam was released, which of course was the first adaptation of, like, Fear and Loathing and Thompson's life, at least going through that, with Bill Murray. I don't think I've actually seen that one. I need to. And of course, through that work, Bill Murray and Hunter S Thompson actually became really good friends. Thompson continued writing through the 80s. However, in March 1990, Thompson faced a sexual assault charge. I'm not going to go too far into details, but he was tried for 5 felonies and 3 misdemeanors. But the charges were dropped just a few months later in May. He spent pretty much the majority of the rest of his life just writing irregularly for various outlets, including Rolling Stone and ESPN. But it wasn't anything, he was always like an independent reporter, a contracted reporter, I guess, but he really started to I guess, lose his edge after that. And unfortunately, on February 20th, 2005, Thompson decided to end life on his own terms. He was on the phone with his wife at the time. However, she mistook some of what she heard to be click clacks of the typewriter and ended up hanging up. And the years of substance abuse, of course, is said to contribute to his depression in his later years. And February he considered a particularly depressing month anyways. Him being the sports fan that he was, it was the end of a season. You know, football season's coming to a close. You don't really pick up basketball. You know, basketball is closed. And like, it's just, he didn't like February. It was the end of a lot of things for him.
You get that one last Super Bowl, I guess, or whatever, that one last game, and then it's done.
Yep. And so, with nothing left to distract him from his advanced age and continuing medical problems, he saw no other choice. And he actually wrote a note to his wife. No more games, no more bombs, no more walking, no more fun, no more swimming. 67. That is 17 years past 50. 17 more than I needed or wanted. Boring. I am always bitchy. No fun for anybody. 67. You're getting greedy. Act your age. Relax. This won't hurt.
Man.
Yeah. I had to stop for a second and kind of let that really sink in. Like, it's terrible for anybody to end up feeling that way, no matter what age, right? It's just sad, especially knowing how lively he was when reading experiences like Fear and Loathing, where they riddled with drug abuse, sure, but he was definitely living in the moment and just
always told a great story.
Always. His journalism is world renowned for a reason. And it's a grim end to a wonderful tale of chasing desires and excitement. He spent a lifetime in journalism. He was a pioneer of his style of gonzo journalism, and it will live forever. He loved blending fiction with fact, especially portraying himself, obviously most famously his portrayal of Raoul Duke in Fear and Loathing. His widow established 2 scholarship funds actually in his name, one at Columbia University to benefit U.S. veterans, and another at University of Kentucky for journalism students. And little murals and paintings of Thompson can be spotted all over Louisville. The most famous one that comes to mind for me is the one in Germantown on Barrett Avenue.
That's awesome.
It's the one of the convertible and his face in the mirror and everything. It's really cool. So definitely a sad and tragic end to such a notable figure, and I mean definitely an inspiration, especially during his time, going against the grain for all his life
in so many ways.
Yeah, from getting kicked out of the army honorably though. They liked him enough to give him an honorable discharge, even though they were like, he won't listen. You know, some people get dishonorably discharged or court-martialed for that stuff. So definitely a sad end, but we definitely want to take this opportunity to say that if you or anyone you know is experiencing issues with depression or considering self-harm in any way, please reach out to friends, family, anybody you can, anybody you feel comfortable. And if you'd rather talk to a stranger, all you have to do is pick up any phone in the U.S. and dial 988 to be connected with someone 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Yeah, definitely don't try to combat those types of struggles on your own. It's not easy and sometimes not possible, and it leads to early tragic ends. definitely a sad note to end on, but a deep note. So, do you have anything else you want to add before we end it?
Nope. Nope. Just like you said. If you need help, just reach out. Somebody's there for you. It's sad end to a great story. But we'll be doing more shows like this on other famous people from Kentucky. I know we left on a downer, but next week we'll be doing one on somebody close to the story, right, from Kentucky.
Yes, we will. So, with that, as always, be blessed. Bless someone around you.
See y'all next time.
See you later.